My name is Adele Kowalski. I'm 27 years old. When I was 19, my parents withdrew the $11,400 I had spent 3 years saving for nursing school and transferred every cent to my older brother. Then my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "He's your brother. He needs this more right now. Stop being so difficult." When I refused to smile and thank her for it, she told me I was the problem in this family and asked me to leave. I walked out into a February night in Sudbury with one bag on my shoulder. 6 years later, my mother called me just after 11 on a Thursday night, crying. "Calla needs you," she said. "Only you can help." I laughed. I'll explain the laugh. But first, if you've ever been the one in your family who was expected to give and give and give while someone else received, take a second to like this and subscribe, only if it's already hitting you. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? I read everyone. Now let me take you back to the house I grew up in, because you can't understand the laugh until you understand the rule we all lived by without anyone ever saying it out loud. The rule was simple. Wade came first. Wade always came first. He was 6 years older than me, and by the time I was old enough to notice anything, the pattern was already set like concrete. If Wade wanted something and I wanted the same thing, the fair solution was always that I gave mine up. My mother, Sheila, had a phrase she kept ready for those moments, and she used it so often it stopped sounding like words. "He needs it more right now. You're the strong one." I heard it when I was 8, and he wanted the computer for gaming when I needed it for a school project. I heard it when I was 11, and he asked to have friends over the same weekend. I was supposed to have mine. I heard it when I was 13, and he decided he wanted my bedroom because it was closer to the bathroom, and my father, Gerald, carried my things down the hall while I stood in the doorway holding a lamp, waiting for someone to ask if I minded. Nobody asked. Nobody ever asked. Gerald had a particular way of not helping. He didn't argue with my mother. He just found something to do with his hands whenever things got tense. A shelf that needed leveling, a car that needed looking at. He would drift out of the room the second a conflict started, and by the time he drifted back, it was already settled. Settled always meant I had lost. I used to think he disagreed with her privately. It took me a long time to understand that silence in a house like ours is not neutral. Silence is a vote. I want to be honest about Wade. It would be easy to make him into something cartoonish, and he wasn't. He could be funny and warm when the mood suited him. He remembered things people told him. He could make my mother laugh until she had tears on her face. But that warmth had an on-off quality. When he needed something from you, it would just stop. And you'd realize it had never quite been warmth. It had been a transaction. When I was 9, he borrowed a bracelet my grandmother had left me when she passed. It wasn't expensive. It was a thin silver chain with a pressed flower charm, and it was the only thing in the house that felt like it was only mine. He took it for some reason I've since forgotten, and he lost it. When I cried, my mother sat me down and explained that I was making Wade feel terrible about an accident. Didn't I love my brother? Wasn't a bracelet a small price to pay for peace in the family? I was 9. I apologized to the person who lost my grandmother's bracelet. That's how deep the training went. Around that time, they started calling me the strong one, and the phrase followed me for the next decade. Adele is the strong one. Adele can handle it. Wade is sensitive. Wade needs more. But Adele will be fine. I believed it because when you're a child, the story your parents tell about you becomes the story you tell about yourself. I thought being the strong one meant I was loved for something real. It took me years to understand it wasn't a compliment. It was a job description. There's one afternoon I think about more than the others. I was 15, and I'd won a regional award at school, a certificate and my name read out at assembly. It wasn't a grand thing, but it felt grand to me. I came home holding it, lit up from the inside, and I found my mother on the phone in the kitchen, upset. Wade had gotten into an argument somewhere that had blown into a household crisis by our family's standards. My mother put her hand over the receiver, glanced at the certificate, and said, Not now, Adele. Your brother's having a hard time. I put the certificate in a drawer. Nobody ever asked to see it again. I learned that day that good news from me was an interruption, and bad news from Wade was an event. I filed it away with everything else and got very good at not needing anyone to look at my certificates. I started saving when I was 16. I want you to understand what that means, because it matters everything that comes after. I got a job at a Tim Hortons near the highway the spring I turned 16. Weekends first, then weeknights when I could pick up shifts. I opened a savings account at the credit union at the end of our street. Because I was a minor, the account needed a cosigner. My mother's name went on it next to mine. I didn't think twice about it. You don't, at 16. You don't imagine your own mother as a risk. For 3 years I put almost everything I made into that account. I skipped things other kids didn't skip. I told myself it was worth it because that money was a door. It was the RPN program at the college in Sudbury. The prerequisites I'd already mapped. The life I could see clearly if I could just get myself there. By the winter I turned 19, I had $11,400 in that account. I used to check the balance on my phone, just to feel it. $11,400. Every shift for 3 years, 1 tip at a time. It was the most solid thing in my life. That same winter, Wade fell. He'd been working construction, but the company let people go after a slow season. He lost his apartment. He'd gotten into some trouble with money he owed someone. My parents whispered about it in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. I felt for him. He was scared, and I could see that. But I also felt the air change, the way you feel pressure drop before a storm. I knew. The way you know something in your body before your mind catches up. A bill was coming, and it was going to have my name on it. My mother sat me down in February. She didn't ask. That's the part that seems impossible when I tell it. She informed me. She said Wade needed a clean start, that family takes care of family, and that they had already moved my savings to help him get settled somewhere new. Already moved. Past tense. $11,400. Gone before the conversation started. Because her name was on the account and she didn't need my signature. I asked how she could do that. I asked what I was supposed to do about school. And my mother looked at me with something close to disappointment, like I was the one behaving badly. He's your brother, she said. He needs this more right now. Stop being so difficult. I didn't yell. I've replayed that night more times than I can count, and I didn't yell. I just stopped. I stopped nodding. I stopped softening my face. I stopped performing the gratitude that was the price of staying. I said quietly that it wasn't fair. That was all. My mother's face closed like a door. She said if I was going to bring this kind of attitude into the house during a hard time for the family, then maybe I was the real problem. And then she said the thing I never thought she would say. She told me to go. I looked at Gerald. He was standing in the hallway, half in shadow, and for 1 second his mouth opened. I waited. I gave him that second. He looked at the floor. Wade was on the couch. As I passed him with my bag, he said something I've never forgotten. Not sorry, not stay. He said you'll figure it out, you always do. I packed one bag, a duffel I'd had since high school. Clothes, my documents, my phone charger, my college acceptance letter I hadn't been able to act on, and the hollow feeling where $11,400 used to be. I walked out into a February night and heard the door shut behind me. The sound was so ordinary it frightened me. I slept on a friend's couch for 2 nights. Her family was kind in the careful way of people who have their own troubles and can sense how close to the edge things are. I knew I couldn't stay. So I did the math the way I'd learned to do it, cold and clear, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to rebuild my life in the same city where the door had closed. Ottawa was 4.5 hours southeast, far enough that no one would drop by unannounced, big enough to disappear into. A place with a college that had the nursing pathway I needed, the one I'd been saving toward for 3 years. I drove through the dark and went. Those first months, I won't pretend they were anything but hard. I got a job at a retirement home as a personal support worker, PSW work, mostly just being present with residents, helping them through the day. I rented a room I could barely afford. There were nights I sat on the floor with a calculator and let myself be furious for exactly as long as it took to fall asleep. Then I got up and went to work. The person who changed it was Imogen. Imogen worked the same floor at the care home, a few years older, and she had a quality I'd never encountered before. She was almost impossible to lie to. She noticed I was rationing meals before I told anyone I was rationing meals. One evening she just said flat out, "You're staying at my place until you're on your feet. I've got a couch." I started to do the thing I'd been trained to do my whole life, calculate what I'd owe, what the catch was, how to pay it back. She saw it on my face before I said a word. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "That's how this works." I didn't know it worked like that. Nobody had ever shown me it did. I sat on Imogen's couch that first night and cried the way you cry when someone is unexpectedly kind to you and you have no category for it. I got my PSW certification and worked while chipping away at prerequisites. Then I got into the RPN program at the college. 2 years. I worked through those too. There was a semester I nearly quit. A clinical placement went badly, an instructor was hard on me, and I sat in my car in a parking lot seriously considering walking away, because some part of me still believed the old story, that I wasn't the smart one, I was just the strong one, and strong wasn't enough for this. I called Imogen. She let me talk, and then she said, "You're tired. Tired isn't the same as wrong." I went back inside. Somewhere in those years I said no to Wade for the first time in my life, and I remember it because of how sick it made me. He texted me at 2 in the morning, needed a few $100s, right away, no explanation, the usual promise to pay it back. I was a student living on a PSW's wages. I sat there with my thumb over the keyboard and typed the shortest, hardest sentence I'd ever sent him. "I don't have it." 3 seconds later my phone rang. Not Wade. My mother, awake at 2 in the morning, telling me that family helps family, that Wade was going through so much, that I was being selfish. From 4.5 hours away, they were still one operation, working me from both directions. I let it go to voicemail. I lay awake the rest of the night, feeling like I had done something monstrous. I hadn't. I had just declined to set myself on fire to keep someone else warm. It only felt monstrous because I had never once been allowed to do it before. That was the real education of those years. Not the diploma. The diploma I earned in classrooms. The harder thing, the thing that cost me every one of those sleepless nights, was learning that no is a complete sentence, and that the guilt that follows it is just an old alarm going off in an empty house. I passed my licensing exam and became a registered practical nurse. I took a job in a pediatric unit at a hospital in Ottawa, which is not an easy landing for someone newly licensed, but I'd learned that I didn't come apart when other people did. Steadiness, it turns out, is worth more in that work than almost anything. I was never rich, I want to be clear about that, because this isn't a story where I came back a millionaire. I just became a person with a license, a paycheck that covered rent, and a skill that lived in my hands. One nobody could withdraw from a joint account. The one person I couldn't fully close the door on was Calla. Wade had a daughter with a woman he'd been with for a few years. They separated when Calla was still a baby, and Wade had been her primary parent since. Over those 6 years I made the drive back to Sudbury maybe 2 or 3 times, not for my parents, not for Wade, but because of the little girl I kept thinking about. Each time I came, Calla was bigger and a little quieter, and each time she'd spot me and something in her face would ease, the way it does when a child finds the person they trust. She had a little stuffed moose I'd given her on her 3rd birthday. She called him Ade, a shortened version of my name, and she carried him everywhere. I didn't think that was funny. I thought it was the saddest and most important thing I'd ever heard. By the time I was 26, my life was finally mine. I had my own apartment, a job I was proud of, a chosen family in Imogen and Tamara, the charge nurse who'd taken me under her wing. For the first time since I was 16, I wasn't bracing for the next thing to be taken. Then, on a Thursday night in late November, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen on that screen in years. Mum. I let it ring twice. I thought about not answering. Then I thought of Kala, and I picked up. My mother was crying before I said a word, not the controlled crying I remembered from arguments she meant to win. This was ragged, out of breath, the crying of someone who has run out of every other option. "Adil," she said, "please don't hang up." I didn't hang up. I also didn't fill the silence for her, which was new for me. The old me would have rushed in to smooth it over. I just waited. "Kala needs you," she said. "Only you can help with this. Only you." And that's when I laughed. I need to explain the laugh, because if you take one wrong thing from it, you'll take everything wrong. I didn't laugh because anyone was hurting. There was a child somewhere in this situation, and nothing about it was funny. I laughed because of the sentence. "Kala needs you." The exact 3 words, in the exact order, in the exact voice that had been used on me my entire life, the sentence that had emptied my savings account and my childhood, and finally my place in that house. 6 years of silence, and the first thing out of her mouth was the sentence. They had thrown me away to rescue Wade, and now they were calling me back to rescue Wade's daughter, and they truly could not hear how absurd it was. To them, I was still the strong one. Still the family's designated repair kit. The laugh came up before I could stop it. It wasn't cruelty. It was the sound of something breaking loose after a very long time. My mother heard it and got it completely wrong. Her voice sharpened for just a second. "This isn't something to laugh at, Adele." There she was, the woman who could pivot mid-sub. I stopped laughing and asked what was going on. She talked around it the way she always talked around things. Kala was having a hard stretch. Things were complicated. Family needed to pull together. And then she said something that took all the air from my chest. "She's here with us. For now." For now. I asked the only question that mattered. "Where is Kala right now, Mum? Tell me that first." A silence on the line that lasted too long for a simple question about a child's location. "She's with us," she finally said. "It's been hard on her. That's why we need you. For now." 2 words. They opened a door I couldn't close. I told her I'd call her back. I sat in my dark apartment with the phone in my hand and understood that whatever was actually happening in that house, for now, had become a way of life. A 4-year-old living with her grandparents for now. I thought about the visits I'd made, about how Kala had always seemed like a child managing something too large for her. Then I thought of Tamara. In the morning, I called Tamara and asked her a careful hypothetical, the kind you ask when you can't say too much yet. She listened and then said the thing I already knew and had been avoiding. A child's safety is never a private family matter. Whatever the family believes it is, that's not what it is. I took 2 days off and drove the 4.5 hours back to Sudbury. I told myself I wasn't going for them. I was going for a 4-year-old who had named her stuffed moose after me. I didn't go to Wade's place. Wade didn't really have a stable place. That was the first thing I pieced together. I went to my parents' house, the house I'd been shown the door of, and Kala answered it. She was holding the moose. She looked up at me and her whole face changed and she said, "Aunt Adele, are you staying this time? Are you staying this time?" 4 years old, and she had already learned to ask whether the safe person was going to disappear. I won't describe everything I saw in that house, because a child deserves privacy even inside a story. But I'll tell you what I noticed, because I noticed it the way a pediatric nurse notices, which is not the same as the way a family member notices. I noticed Kala was too quiet. I noticed the state of things a child had clearly been living in for a while. I noticed my mother steering me away from certain rooms and certain questions, and Gerald not meeting my eyes, and Wade not being there, and no one wanting to say exactly where he was or what was wrong. They gave me the rehearsed version. Wade was going through a hard time. He couldn't manage things right now. They were helping with Kala, but it was getting to be too much at their age. And then my mother said, the real reason I'd been summoned across 475 kilometers. She said it gently, like she was offering me something. "You take her quietly. No Cass, no lawyers. You've always been so good with her, that's what family does. No casts, no lawyers. I heard those words and something clicked into place. This wasn't a plea for help. This was a handoff. They didn't want me to help Calla. They wanted me to take her off the books, quietly, so that whatever had been going wrong could stay inside the family, where nobody would ever have to answer for it. They weren't asking me to protect a child. They were asking me to absorb a problem, the way I had absorbed every problem my entire life, so they wouldn't have to. Then I saw the notice on the refrigerator, half hidden under a magnet, from the daycare. The words at the top read, "Third notice." Before I tell you what that notice unraveled, let me ask you something. Based on everything you've heard so far, why do you think they really called me after 6 years of silence? Hold your theory. Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. Third notice. I stood in front of that refrigerator and read it twice. The daycare was asking my parents to please make contact regarding Calla's attendance and well-being, which meant there had been a first notice and a second, and someone in that house had received both and done nothing. I did what I do at work when a story doesn't add up. I stopped reacting and started counting. My mother had told me on the phone this was recent, sudden, a crisis, but a third notice isn't sudden. I asked, keeping my voice level, how long Calla had been staying with them. My mother gave me a number that was too small. A few weeks, maybe a month. That afternoon, their neighbor came by. An older woman named Mrs. Prue, from my mother's church. She brought a container of soup and didn't know she was walking into anything. She saw me, reached out and touched my arm, and said the thing that cracked the whole story open. "Oh, thank goodness, we've all been so worried about that little one for months now. I'm just so relieved someone finally came." Months, not a few weeks, months, we've all been worried. A whole street had seen it. A whole congregation had murmured about it. And nobody inside that house had picked up the phone to the one relative who was a trained pediatric nurse until the situation was bad enough that outside people were about to get involved. My mother's smile didn't change, but her hand did. She reached out and guided Mrs. Prue toward the kitchen, toward coffee, away from me. I stood there and let the arithmetic finish. They hadn't called me when it started. They'd called me when it looked bad. When the daycare sent a third notice. When the neighbors had been talking for months. When no CS, no lawyers was the only thing standing between this family and consequences they desperately did not want. The urgency in my mother's voice hadn't been about Calla at all. It had been about exposure. I went to find Calla because I needed to be near her more than I needed to be right. She was in the back room, sitting on the floor, lining up the same small collection of toys over and over, the careful, repetitive play of a child who is managing something too large for her. I sat down beside her. She leaned into my side without looking up, the way she had when she was 2. Then she said, in a matter-of-fact voice, the way children deliver the things that stop your heart, "Daddy went away again." Grandma said, "Don't tell. Don't tell." Somewhere in that house, a 4-year-old had been handed a secret to carry, and she had been carrying it because the adults she loved had asked her to. I recognized it instantly, because I had been that child, the one who learned that the family's comfort depended on her silence. The pattern hadn't just repeated. It had reached down a generation and put its hand on Calla. And no one in that house had noticed they were doing to her exactly what they had done to me. My last hesitation died in that room. I asked to see Calla's things, said I wanted to know what to pack. My mother, eager to seal the handoff, let me into the spare room where Wade's boxes were stacked. I wasn't looking for evidence. I want to be clear about that. I was a woman looking through her brother's boxes for a child's clothes. But I found something anyway. The way the truth surfaces when you've stopped forcing it. An old bank statement of Wade's, mixed into a folder of unsorted papers nobody had ever bothered to go through, and on it, a deposit, dated the same week I had walked out of this house 6 years ago. $11,400. I sat down on the floor of that room, with the statement in my hands. For 6 years, I had told myself a story about the money, that my parents had taken it for some vague family emergency. I had made a kind of peace with the vagueness, because the vagueness let me believe it had gone somewhere necessary. It hadn't gone somewhere vague. It had gone directly into Wade's account. That exact number, my number, deposited into his life the same week they emptied mine and put me on the road. My future hadn't disappeared into a family crisis. It had been transferred, dollar for dollar, into my brother's soft landing while I had a fuel tank and nowhere to go. I kept looking. I found the other thing, a letter from a finance company, opened and folded back up. My parents' names were on it as co-signers on a truck loan of Wade's. The letter reminded them they remained responsible for the outstanding balance. The payments had stopped. There it was, the real reason for the Thursday night call, in black and white. They weren't drowning in worry for Calla. They were exposed. If this situation went the official route, if the daycare's notices turned into a children's aid file, if Calla's living situation became a matter of record, everything else could surface too. Their names on Wade's debt, the months of neglect they had known about and covered. The picture of a family that had let a child slide while protecting an adult. No Cass, no lawyers wasn't about protecting Calla, it was about protecting themselves. I called Tamara from the driveway. I told her more this time. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked the question that reorganized everything. Adil, who's the stable one here? Who has the job, the home, the professional record, the training? When Children's Aid looks at this family and asks who can safely care for that little girl, who are they looking at? I hadn't let myself think in those terms, but once she said it, I couldn't unsee it. My mother thought she was asking me for a favor. Gerald thought they were offloading a burden onto the strong one more time. Neither of them understood what they had actually done. In any honest look at this family, I was the only stable, employed, documented, trained adult in the picture, which meant I wasn't the one coming to beg. I was the one who held the door. I drove back to Ottawa to think, because I didn't trust myself to make this decision inside that house, breathing that air. I sat at Imogen's kitchen table and laid it all out, and Imogen, who has never once let me lie to myself, asked the only question that mattered. Okay, you can take Calla. But why are you doing it? For her? Or to finally be the one they need? To finally be seen? She held my eyes, because only one of those keeps you sane. It landed hard. Because a real part of me wanted them to watch. Wanted my mother to finally see what she had thrown away. That part of me was still hungry for the recognition I'd been chasing since I was 9 years old with a borrowed bracelet. And sitting at that table, I knew that if I acted from that hunger, I'd end up right back inside the same pattern, wearing a different costume, the strong one, riding in to fix Wade's mess, so grateful to be needed that I'd take it all on my shoulders again, quietly, off the books. I wasn't going to do it quietly. I would protect Calla, but I would do it through proper channels, through Children's Aid, with a caseworker involved, with paperwork, with a record that could not be undone on someone's whim. Not a quiet handoff in a kitchen. A legal kinship arrangement that stood in the open. The dark was what they wanted, because the dark protected them. The light protected Calla. I made myself a short list of conditions. Not out of cruelty, out of the understanding that conditions were the only thing that had ever stopped this family from running the same play again. Full transparency about Wade's situation. My parents accountable for what was theirs, and Wade, if he ever wanted a real place in Calla's life, would get there after he did real work. Not before, not because he had a hard month, not because he cried on the phone. Help was going to come with terms this time. That's not the same as revenge. That's the end of a pattern. By the time I drove back to Sudbury, the situation had moved on its own. The daycare's third notice had done what third notices do. A caseworker from Children's Aid, a woman named Denise, calm and precise and impossible to read, had scheduled a meeting to assess Calla's situation. That was why we were all in one room. Me, my mother, Gerald, Wade, and Denise with a folder. Wade walked in like he'd already won. He'd pulled himself together for the occasion, warm and rueful and utterly in control of the version he was telling. "It's temporary," he said, mostly to Denise. "Every family hits rough patches. We handle things ourselves. We always have." My mother nodded along, conducting, the way she had my whole life. For a few minutes, it worked. The story they were telling was smooth and reasonable, and I could see it beginning to settle over the room. My mother said it out loud, warm as anything. "So it's settled. Adele takes Calla, and we keep this inside the family." She smiled at me like we were finally on the same team. That's when I put the daycare notice on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I slid it into the center, where everyone could see the words at the top. "Third notice," I said. "Mrs. Prue mentioned it's been months, so someone in this room has known about this for a long time." The room changed temperature. My mother's smile held, but it stopped meaning anything. Denise leaned forward and read the notice without touching it. My mother recovered fast. She always did. She switched tracks so smoothly it would have impressed me if it weren't aimed at me. "You weren't here, Adele," she said, and there was the particular hurt in her voice she used when she needed to become the wounded one. "You left us. You don't get to come back after 6 years and judge what you don't understand. You weren't here." The oldest move in her book. Turn the person telling the truth into the person who abandoned them. A year ago it might have worked on me. I let it sit for a moment. Then I said calmly, "You're right, I wasn't here. Let's talk about why." I didn't pull out the bank statement. I didn't need to wave it around like a weapon. I just said the shape of it out loud, plainly, for the room. 6 years ago, you withdrew the money I had saved for 3 years and you put it into Wade's account. You told me I was being difficult for minding, and then you told me to leave. So no, I wasn't here. You made sure of that. My mother started to speak. "I'm not bringing that up to relitigate it," I said, still quiet. "I'm bringing it up because it's the same thing happening right now, with a different person paying for it. Last time it was my future. This time it's a 4-year-old. Wade felt the room tilting and did what he always did when he was losing. He got warmer, more wounded. He turned to Denise with the practiced softness that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. "She's angry at our parents," he said, "and she's using my daughter to get back at them. That's what this is." It was almost a smart move. It reframed the only stable adult in the room as the unstable one. But Denise had already read a third notice that said months. She'd already heard a neighbor say months. She'd already watched my mother steer that neighbor toward the coffee pot and away from me. She didn't take the bait. She asked Wade, evenly, to walk her through the last 30 days, where Calla had slept each week, who had taken her to daycare, who had signed the notices. And I watched my brother try to build a month out of air. The dates didn't connect. The names kept shifting. Every sentence he offered to save himself became one more brick in the wall closing behind him. Then Denise looked around the table, unhurried, and asked the question that ended the performance. "Let me ask it plainly. Who here can provide a stable, documented, safe home for Calla today?" Silence. My mother opened her mouth and closed it. Because the honest answer was sitting in the room, and it wasn't her. It wasn't Gerald, who had his own quiet struggles he'd spent a lifetime not looking at. It wasn't Wade. It was the daughter they'd put on the road at 19 for refusing to smile while they took everything she had. Every eye in that room moved to me. I let the quiet do the work. Then I said, the thing I had driven almost 1,000 kilometers to be able to say in front of witnesses. "You didn't call me to help," I said to my mother evenly. "You called me because I'm the only one who can, and those aren't the same thing." Her whole posture shifted. She went, in the space of a breath, from a woman issuing terms to a woman negotiating for them. "Adele," she said softer now, reaching, "we're family. Let's talk about this like family." Wade lunged to get in front of it. "She's my daughter. I decide where she goes. And I say she stays here where I can see her." He was trying to keep Calla inside the closed circle, But he'd just said it in front of the one person in the room whose job was to ask the next question. Denise asked gently, with a pen. Where had Calla been sleeping each week? Who had actually taken her to daycare or not? What did the third notice mean? Wade's answers got thinner with everyone. The more he talked, the more he locked the door he was trying to hold open. He wasn't being defeated by me. He was being undone by the plain daylight of his own account. I didn't gloat. There was a child 2 rooms away with a stuffed moose, and none of this felt like winning. I looked at Wade and then at my mother, and I said quietly, Calla is not a way to save this family's image. She's 4 years old, and I'm the person she trusts. Denise closed her folder. She said, in the careful language people in her profession use, that based on what she was seeing, I appeared to be the appropriate kinship placement for Calla, and that she would support moving in that direction through the proper process. The room went quiet in a different way than before. And then Gerald stood up. Gerald, who had not said a single word the entire meeting, who had spent my entire childhood finding something to fix with his hands whenever the truth walked in. He stood there with his hands shaking, and he looked at me, not at the floor, at me, and he said, There's something you need to hear. My mother said his name like a warning. He kept going anyway. It was the bravest thing I ever saw him do, which tells you everything about how low the bar had been. The 11,000, he said. When we took it, we told you it was for the family. We let you believe it was some kind of shared emergency. He swallowed. It wasn't. It went to Wade, all of it. We took your future and handed it to your brother so he'd have a soft place to land, and we called you selfish for minding. His voice cracked. You've been paying for his landings your whole life. We made sure of it. And I stood in that hallway and I let it happen. I already knew. I'd found the statement. But knowing a thing and having it confessed in that room, out loud in front of everyone, that's different. Knowing and being witnessed are not the same. Something I had been holding for 6 years finally set itself down. And in that quiet, the last piece turned over. That phrase they had pinned on me since I was a child, you're the strong one. I finally understood what it had always meant. It wasn't praise, it was a permission slip, the sentence that let them take, because if I was strong, then I could spare it, and if I could spare it, then taking it wasn't theft. It was just family. I thought that realization would flatten me. It did the opposite, it set me free, because if the strength was real, and it was I had built it myself, one shift at a time, then it was mine. It had never belonged to them, and I got to decide what to do with it. Wade was watching me, and for the first time the confidence was gone from his face. He wasn't cruel in that moment. He was just scared. I felt the old pull to soften it for him, to fix his feelings the way I'd been trained to do. I didn't. But I didn't twist anything either. I'm not here to end you, Wade, I said. I'm here to stop covering for you. Those aren't the same thing. He asked me one question then, and it was the only one that made me think he might someday be capable of change. He didn't ask what would happen to him. He asked, Is Calla going to be okay? Yes, I said. I'm going to make sure of it. And then Calla settled the last thing that needed settling, the way children do, without knowing the weight of it. She'd wandered to the doorway, holding the moose, and she came and stood close beside me, the way she always stood beside me, and she tugged my sleeve and said in a small voice, Can we go to your house? It's quiet at your house. I like when it's quiet. 6 years of sporadic visits, a stuffed moose with my name on him, a child who had been keeping a running tally of which adult was safe. She'd made her choice a long time before that room. I just hadn't understood until that moment that every drive I'd made back to Sudbury, every afternoon I'd spent sitting on the floor with her, had been building the one bond in this whole story that nobody could take out of a joint account. Family, it turns out, isn't who shares your blood. It's who a scared child walks toward when the room gets loud. I said what I had driven almost 1,000 kilometers to be able to say, clearly, in front of witnesses, in the open, where it couldn't be rewritten later. I'll take responsibility for Calla, I said. I won't take responsibility for all of you. Not anymore. That truth didn't break me. It let me go. With Denise's support, Kala came home with me under an emergency kinship arrangement. The formal steps worked their way through the proper process. Paperwork, not a gavel, just the slow official machinery that makes a thing real, and hard to undo. I drove the 4.5 hours north, and this time the bag I'd once carried out alone came back with a 4-year-old's clothes folded inside it and a stuffed moose on the seat beside me. There were 2 of us in the car. The consequences my parents had been so desperate to avoid came anyway, without any help from me. The finance company didn't stop sending letters because I had shown up. The bill for a lifetime of covering Wade finally landed where it had always actually belonged. I didn't cause it. I just stopped standing in front of it. Wade called once, furious. When furious didn't move me, he switched to devastated and said the sentence that had run our whole lives. "We're family, Adele. How can you do this to family?" I noticed I wasn't afraid of it anymore. It used to land like a verdict. Now it just sounded like a lock trying keys that no longer fit. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I stopped doing your consequences for you. That's not the same thing." He hung up, but he called back 2 days later, quieter, and didn't ask for anything. That quiet was the first honest sound I'd heard from him in years. My mother called near the end and did the thing that had always worked on me before. She cried and said, "We all made mistakes, Adele. All of us. Let's just move forward." Notice what that sentence does. It spreads the guilt into a fog where nobody is responsible for anything specific, and invites me to be the bigger person one last time, to dissolve the whole account with a nod. A year ago, I would have taken it. "Name yours," I said. "Name the specific thing you did. Then we can talk." Silence. My mother, who had a sentence ready for every occasion of my life, did not have one for that. For the first time, she had nothing to say, and I understood that what she'd offered was never an apology. It was a key she used to open me back up. Gerald was different. A week later, he sent a letter. Actual handwriting on actual paper, which he had never done in my life. He didn't spread the blame. He wrote, "I stayed quiet for 20 years. I let them take from you because it was easier than standing in a hallway and saying no. That was my choice, and it was wrong." He didn't ask for anything. He didn't ask to be forgiven or let back in. He just named the specific thing he had done, which is the only kind of apology that has ever meant anything. I didn't dissolve my boundaries for that letter. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and I had finally learned the difference. But I wrote him back. Not the whole family. Just him. One narrow door, left open a crack, for the one person who had finally stopped finding a shelf to level. It's been a few months now since that room. Kala is enrolled in a daycare here in Ottawa, and she goes every single day, and no one is sending notices. That ordinary fact is the thing I am proudest of in my entire life. She sleeps through the night, mostly. She has a small chair at Imogen's kitchen table, because Imogen adopted the 2 of us the way she adopts everyone worth keeping. Tamara checks in like the Aunt Kala deserves. The kinship arrangement is still working through its steps, the way real things do, and I'm not pretending it's finished. But it's real, and it's in the light, and it cannot be undone on someone's whim. Tamara came over last week and watched Kala draw at that little chair, humming quietly to herself, relaxed in the way children get when they finally believe the ground will stay under them. Tamara said softly, "That's what safe looks like." I had to leave the room for a minute. Wade called again not long after. This time it was different. Not a request, not an emergency. He'd started getting real help. Early days, fragile, the very beginning of the work. I told him the truth, which was gentler than he expected and firmer than he wanted. You can be in her life when you've done the work. Not before. Not because you had a hard week. When it's real, he didn't argue. That was new. I've decided to let a start be a start without needing it to be a promise. For years, I kept my duffel bag by the door of every place I lived. I never fully unpacked the part of me that was always ready to leave, always braced for the moment someone would tell me I was the problem and show me out. Last week I folded that bag and put it on the top shelf of the hall closet. I don't need it by the door anymore. Nobody here is going to use the sentence on me. That night, after I put Kala to bed, she called down the hallway the way children do when they're just checking that the world is still where they left it. Aunt Adele. I'm here, I said. A pause. Then is this home? Yes, I told her. This is home. So am I, finally. That's why I laughed. The night my mother called after 6 years and told me Kala needed me. Not because anyone was hurting, because I finally heard the sentence for what it had always been. It was never about my niece needing me. It was about them needing me to disappear into a role one more time. And the girl who used to say yes to that sentence wasn't at the end of the line anymore. She had packed one bag, driven 4.5 hours, and built a life where the strong one finally got to decide what her strength was for. It was for the small voice at the end of the hallway, making sure the safe person hadn't left. I hadn't, I never will.